Good afternoon, evening, morning, wherever it is for you guys out there. And my name is Peter Brogan, and again, I run a company called Your DNA Awakening. I'm just making sort of a short little video here to just sort of talk about enlightenment and 3D lower self and higher self integration. And I guess sort of like the idea of sort of enlightened beings down here, right? And we have maybe a lot of sort of old paradigms that are left over about, enlightened beings, and their body of golden liquid light that are, sitting off in a cave, with nothing, and they survive on, air and light and, all that sort of stuff, which again was all very fancy stuff happening in its time and place for incarnated avatars that were blossoming into their highest divine expression down here, right? Super cool. But for their time and place, their higher selves and lower selves, their enlightened state, they were sort of serving a purpose, sitting up there in that sort of state, providing that sort of frequency and role within that particular like religion, culture, period, time on the earth, right? Um, which again means they were sort of providing a super fancy channel and frequency to help people become more enlightened, right? Um, again, we're in a different time and place and culture down here right now, and a lot of the most sort of enlightened beings you're going to find on Earth, right, is as they become sort of enlightened and their higher self, lower self integrates and stabilizes, right, which again is a lot of helpful stuff through DNA activation, right, and your DNA awakening, and somebody like me or other DNA facilitators can really help overcome distortions that are keeping the consciousness and light body from achieving its highest divine expression, right? And all sorts of masters that you've heard about in the past have all had other masters, right, including myself, that have helped us up through this type of DNA activation work, or Shakti pots, or whatever you want to call it, consciousness transmissions, right? But sort of anybody that's reached the highest states of sort of light and consciousness down here have had help from other people and masters, right? They didn't just sort of like sit off all angry in a corner and they're like, I didn't, I just know how to do this myself, and I don't need anybody else, and I don't need anybody else's energy, I don't need anybody else's, you know. And again, a lot of the highest divine masters have all accessed people that have helped integrate their higher self and lower self through Shakti pots or DNA activations or spiritual transmissions or whatever, right? That your DNA awakening is very, very helpful and good at. And but again, once we sort of achieve these like enlightened states as beings down here, right? Well, then how do we start achieving our highest divine expression, right? And there's a lot of like high divine light workers that are, maybe stuck in the paradigm of they're supposed to be sort of sitting off in a cave somewhere, not interacting and building and growing with the community and world and commerce of this particular earth-based reality right now. But again, a lot of enlightenment is that your lower self is going to reflect your higher self enlightenment and integration, right? And so as your sort of higher self integrates, right, you end up in sort of more enlightened states, which then get reflected in your world. And the more enlightened you are, the more carefree, abundant, co-creative you should be within this particular time and space that you're incarnated, which means not being restricted by sex or money, right, or sort of anything, consciousness or, anything that's sort of restricting people from living their highest divine expressions down here. And it's, the idea that, a lot of people think there's like higher divine spiritualities than their lower 3D incarnated self. Right? And again, this DNA work helps ground in the higher self so that you sort of become this one sort of like blossomed expression of your incarnate, like higher dimensional, lower dimensional parts, right? And it's the idea that you don't see a rainbow, and because the red one is on the lowest dense version of the energy matrix spectrum, that it's somehow different than red, orange, or than orange, green, yellow, blue, indigo, and violet, right? No, they're all part of this like rainbow, right? Uh, and you don't say just because red is like on the end and it's the most low dense vibrating state, like we're here in this low dense 3D energy matrix, right, that it's any different or less divine or separate, right, or not as abundantly co-creative as the rest of the colors or the rest of your higher self or the finer, higher light dimensions of yourself, right? And again, as you start to access, a lot of DNA activation work, which can really help ground that consciousness in, right? Then the life adjusts, right? And the more enlightened you are down here, the more you're going to have more money and freedom and love of all kinds, right? The more you're going to be not experiencing lack and suffering and depression and less, right? And so anyway, that's just kind of my video about sort of enlightened states down here, right? Are blossoming into different expressions than enlightened states were 2,000 years ago, or 5,000 years ago, or 400 years ago, right? And again, as you sort of become more enlightened down here, you end up just manifesting in a more enlightened life, right? And that's very, very helpful and powerful, for a lot of people that are engaged in sort of spiritual evolution down here. And so again, thanks for listening for whatever 5-6 minutes. My name is Peter Rogan. Again, I run a company called Your DNA Awakening, and you can access all sorts of higher dimensional, higher self, lower self integration tools, video coding, one-on-one work, all sorts of amazing stuff. And thanks for listening so much. Have a good afternoon, evening, morning, wherever it is for you.